money is a very dangerous tool, and it can be a force of good, but it can also be a force for very bad things, and no one teaches you how to handle it. If I can look back in time, there was a short phase where you experience that wealth suddenly, that it catches you doing things that are probably not the best reflection of who you could be. And it takes a conscious effort for you to pump the brakes. And money is a tool, but it's not a goal. And if you stick to the mission, the money will follow.
We have a wonderful guest and a wonderful guest host. You got John Dimitros here on the mic, and our guest today is Gus Haddad. And Gus is a friend of mine that I've known now for some time. We actually met through an unfortunate event, which was a cryptocurrency exchange bankruptcy. But out of every negative thing, there is always opportunity and upside if you look hard enough. So I'm very fortunate that I got to meet Gus and our other friend David, and both of them live in Houston. I had the opportunity to spend some time with both of them a few months ago at Gus's ranch, which was amazing. And we got to talking about a lot of different things. And Gus's story was very inspiring to me because Gus is an immigrant. He came here, he became a medical doctor. He's a great success story that you love to hear about because it makes you believe and acknowledge that the American dream is still there. On top of that, Gus has a lot of very interesting views and thoughts on health. And he's got some personal anecdotes and some very personal stories. And Lawrence, we were just talking off air before we started that you are kind of reading a book now that is very aligned with some of the things Gus does in his life and how he lives and what he does with his health. So anyways, Gus, without further ado, can you tell us a little bit about your youth and upbringing and how you got to the United States?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for the lovely introduction. Much appreciated. And it is true, we met in very unfortunate circumstances. However, we did turn the outcome into a very positive one. We were able to reverse the money or the crypto that was hijacked at that exchange by getting a bunch of random strangers together, bunching up and hiring a very good legal team from New York. And that was a fascinating experience that I will never forget. It introduced me to amazing people like you, John, like David and some other guys, and can't wait to hang out with you again.
I should note to let the listeners know we have an updated little vacation. I think we're going to do another trip soon. So we're looking forward to that, but please keep going.
Sure. So I grew up in Beirut, Lebanon, under very unfortunate circumstances during the civil war in Lebanon. So I was born in 1975, literally the first year the civil war started and lasted for a good part of 15 years. So the first 15 years of my childhood was dodging bullets and rockets and all the fun things that come with war. But I think war is one of those things where it can change you in very different ways. It can make you a very bitter, angry, resentful person, or it can teach you what not to do in life and how to be a good person. I like to think it drove me into the latter direction. That being said, since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to become a doctor. Like everyone knew Gus was going to be a doctor. People would call me a doctor in high school just because that's what I wanted to do. So I had a passion for medicine, for biology, for learning how the body works and all these things. So I did my undergrad in biology at the American University of Beirut, followed by medical school there. And I was able to get all my ducks in a row from a credentialing perspective to be able to come straight to the US and specialize and then subspecialize in infertility. So what got me to the US was really medical training or postgraduate medical training with the initial idea that, or plan, I was going to get my degrees, go back home to Lebanon and practice until I die and retire there. But life took me in a different direction. The more I got to live here in this wonderful country that we call America, the more I fell in love with it. And I've been here before I moved here. I've been to the US for a few summer vacations or a couple of weeks here and there. You never get a feel for what this country has to offer until you truly live here. And when you first move, the change in system and culture and lifestyle, it takes a lot of adjusting. But once that acute phase is over and you open up your mind to what this country has to offer, the sky is the limit. So this country had become my home. I proudly say it, and I'm thankful to be here, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Can I ask you, so I have a 4-year-old, and before I became a parent, I didn't know anything about the importance of the brain development, especially they say the first 3 years, the attachment is so important for them to be held and have love and trust. And then again, I think from 7 to 9, they have these periods of their brain development. So now you're older and wiser. When you look back at your youth, it's incredible. It's beautiful that you said that you didn't, like you said, the war didn't make you resentful or bitter or angry. It seemed like it took you on a path to want to heal people. But can you just, like, now you have the wisdom of adulthood. When you look back at that period, do you think you have some scars from just growing up in such a traumatic environment? Because I think a lot of people, one thing I hate right now is we're in a very polarized country where half the country seems very pro-war. Like, yeah, you can't let Putin get away with this. Let's invade. Let's send troops to Ukraine. And then you have all this stuff going on with Israel in the Middle East. And for me, I just believe that you should be trying to avoid war at all costs. And I've never been in war. I've never been in a civil war that had the experiences you have. But I can just imagine how awful it is. And I feel like people are very cavalier the way they talk about it. So I'd love to just, if you could talk a little bit about that. I just think it's so interesting that you're such a well-adjusted person now. You're an adult, you're a success, you're a doctor, you're a father, but yet you came from a real tough childhood growing up in that environment.
Those are great questions. And I think in a weird way, you kind of answered my point of view. You verbalized it very well, but I'll echo it in my own words. First, I'm definitely older. I'm not sure about the wiser part, but I will take the compliment. I'll run with it. Living in war is one of those things where people are very, very cavalier about it. If you've never experienced war, it's easy for people to advocate for it and push for it and become pro-war and think that violence in certain instances is the answer. I can tell you it's not. And if you can avoid war at any cost, we should pursue that path. It definitely scars people in so many different ways. I can tell you when I moved to the US in 2000, so the Civil War has been over for the good part of 10 years. And I still remember the last time this happened to me, I think it was 2003 or 2004. So 14 years after the fact, if a door slams, I would get a little PTSD reaction. I would get scared and anxious for a few seconds because it brings memories of bombs exploding. And very scary memories would kind of flash in my mind immediately. And it did make a long time to get over it. I haven't had these symptoms or feelings since probably 2003 or 2004, but I know many people who still have them today.
Wow.
Definitely war can affect you in so many different ways, and some of them are permanent. And the people who are pushing for war all the time, it's because they've never experienced it. And if you take those people and put them for one day in a war zone, I bet you they would change their mind about their views politically and how things should shake out or unfold. You know, I'm assuming you're talking about Ukraine in this instance. I bet you most of those people who are advocating for war to continue and push more violence, they've never experienced what a war is like.
And just to add to that, I don't mean to be cynical, but there's a saying that old men start wars and young men fight them.
Yes.
And I'm a believer that behind almost every war on the global stage, there is an ulterior motive for these wars. It's about power, it's about money, it's about political strategizing and trying to get in, and you're actually fighting proxy wars. And it's very sad. So to see politicians and people advocate for wars, I understand that there are wars out there that are just and that have been just in the past century, past 2 centuries. But if you were to look me in the eyes and tell me that a politician or a certain government that's advocating for war and continued war is not profiting off of it in some way, shape, or form, I should say people within that government are not profiting, I would tell you that you probably need to do a little more digging to see that. On that note, I had the pleasure of recently staying at your beautiful home in Houston, which is absolutely, I mean, listen, Lawrence and I are both in real estate. I've been in some magnificent homes. Your home is a trip, and we won't go into details. I don't want to make anybody jealous, but it's absolutely insane. That's all I can tell you. It's a beautiful part of Houston, and it's gorgeous. I had the pleasure of meeting your lovely wife. Could you tell us just quickly how you guys met?
Sure. Before we get into that, I want to actually go back to the whole geopolitical, money-driven war agenda. I echo what you're saying. And I think when people discuss international politics, they tend to insert morality as the driving factor. And it's more often than not power, money, different things that are very immoral are driving factors. I don't think there's much morality in any international war. And I think if you start trying to justify it through moral vantage point, you're already mistaken. And anyone who advocates for war, they're not willing to pick up a rifle or a gun and go fight in that specific war that they're advocating. I think they're being a little hypocritical. And if you ask also those people who are pushing for war, if you tell them, all right, I'll agree with you, but I need you to put your money where your mouth is, just pick up a rifle and go fight it. And I bet you most of them will change their mind if they're faced with that specific situation. So enough talking about war. Let's get back to some happy stuff. I was in medical school in my senior year of medical school in college, and at the American University of Beirut, we had two libraries. There's the medical school library where the people who are serious about studying would go and do their studying and homework, etc. There was a general library where if you wanted to meet people and go out on dates, you would go to the general library. So needless to say, I spent more time not in the medical school library for obvious reasons, and happened to meet my wife at the library, and we hit it off pretty quickly. We started dating, and it was her last year in college and my last year in medical school. And we thought it was going to be a temporary thing, and we're going to date and go out and have fun for that year, and then we'll go our own ways. But things took a different turn, kind of fell in love, and I moved to the US, and she moved over shortly thereafter and did her master's. And 2 kids later, one in college and one about to be in college, here I am.
Living the dream. How did you decide to go into fertility, and what was your first experience, or I should say in the plural, experiences doing fertility or practicing that in the US?
Sure. So I've always, in medical school, I've always knew I wanted to be in women's health. I don't know why. If you ask me, I've tried to think about it and rationalize it. I could not find one specific reason why my passion was driving me to women's health. So I was going to be an OBGYN. I knew that since medical school. And when I came to do my residency, my program director, who became chairman afterwards, was a fertility doctor. And I looked up to him so much. He became like a mentor and idol for me. And I wanted to become him when I grow up. And honestly, he's the only reason I actually became a fertility specialist. He has unfortunately passed a few years back from a brain tumor. He was still relatively young and left a beautiful family behind, but his memory will live on forever in many people's minds and hearts, including myself. And his name is Dr. Brian Cowan. I do miss him a lot.
Oh, so that's the importance of mentors. And that's one thing that I really love about life is, as sad as it is that he's gone, like his essence is living through all the people he influenced along the way, and you're one of them. So it's like we have these things we do in our life, and it just creates these ripples that can make us somewhat immortal. They're just going to keep passing through generations. That's really beautiful.
I couldn't agree more.
Can I ask you guys? So I find it so interesting. I've had a few different careers now in my life, and I'm in my mid-40s. And I feel like every single one of them was somewhat accidental, somewhat kind of a point of luck, how it happened. So I always think it's so interesting when people like you say, I knew as a kid, people called me doctor when I was a kid. They knew that, I just knew that was my path. And now you're a parent, you have your daughters who are older now. Do you think that's because you had something in you, or was it some influence you had as a child Like a lot of parents push kids to go into medical school or the medical field. Like, where did that come from? So I always think that's so interesting when someone is so certain at a young age what they want to be.
That's a very good question. And I've thought about it many times before. I don't think it was driven by social pressure or factors. No one else in my family is in medicine. My parents never pushed me to go down that path. But since I was a kid, as far as I can remember, I was fascinated by how the body works. I would find like a dead animal and I would dissect it just to see what's inside it, even before anyone kind of told me to go down that route. So I think somehow, somewhere my brain was wired to have a passion for biology and medicine. Could it be influence from people that I'm unaware of? Possible, but I don't think so. I've tried to look for that human influence that could have pushed me in that direction. I just could never point a finger at it.
One thing that John doesn't realize because he was born with an American passport, I got mine. I was here. I've been here 23 years now, and it took me about 21 to get my citizenship. And it was many visas, 2 green cards, and then, of course, my final citizenship ceremony. And I remember being so emotional when I finally became a citizen, just because it was such a long journey. And America might not be perfect, but the opportunity here is so incredible for people that work hard. There's so many kindred spirits that just have the entrepreneurial spirit that we share. And it's just, I appreciate America for the blessings that it's given me and my family. And I think it's so wonderful. Did you have that same as a kid growing? Because the thing with England, America is we fought wars together historically. We're very close kind of culturally. We speak the same language. Growing up in Lebanon, was it a distant dream? Because you mentioned you were thinking about getting your degree and then practicing till you died in Lebanon. Was there a part of you when you were young that realized that this environment is maybe not conducive to raising kids, all the strife of the Civil War? And was there an American dream when you were young, or was it only when you were in America that you realized that it might be a better place for you to raise a family?
That's a great question. I think growing up in a country that is third world like Lebanon, where you spend the better part of your day taking care of stuff that is taken for granted here, you have the luxury of thinking about these bigger questions. And my universe was Lebanon. I could not imagine a universe where I was living not in Lebanon. And maybe because I was not exposed to it, I didn't know what America was. I knew about America from movies and Hollywood and all the things that you hear about. And we didn't have the internet back then. We obviously had movies and radio and songs here and there and pop culture, but the exposure wasn't what kids get exposed to today with the instant exchange of information on the internet. So, in my own little universe in my head, Lebanon was the only place I could be. I didn't even imagine I could be living somewhere else. And you don't know what you don't know until I moved to the US and experienced life differently. And initially when I came here, you're a little bit judgmental. You think your way of doing things, your way of thinking is the right way and everyone else is wrong. And people do things differently in different cultures. And it took me a long time to have an open mind that maybe there are certain things that I do better. Maybe there are certain things that this culture does better. And until you open up your mind and start absorbing ideas and different vantage points and different ways of doing things, you don't become a better person, number one. And number two, you don't realize what you're missing out on or what you could be. And you don't unlock your full potential until you do that. And I think before I came to the US, I think I was locking my full potential. I had a closed mind and I did not imagine where I could be today just by being in Lebanon. Had I stayed there, I would not have been able to unlock the potential that I have being here in the US and that relatively short time span.
It's really interesting, Gus, because what you just said about having that closed mind, or I should say not having it, the ability to let your mind open is so important. And I personally think that's the root of so many problems in our world today is people that just have to be right. And they're not willing to sit down and try to experience a culture or a person or a situation and perhaps try and view it from someone else's point of view. And also allow themselves a space in their head to say, hey, maybe what I'm thinking it has the ability to change down the road. Maybe my mind or my preconceived notions or my beliefs. It's like a scientific method, okay? When you're too caught up in believing something and taking offense to things that don't align with your beliefs, I think that it is really detrimental. I think a lot of people deal with that. But on that note, and I see Lawrence posturing to get in and say something, but on that note, I think it's really cool because I do hear a lot of stories about people that relocate to different cultures. And at first, it's a little weird. And they do have their own preconceived notions or their own judgments they came with, but they start to see things differently. And I just, very quick anecdote, I know somebody that went and taught English in China. And we kind of see China as this very, this awful dictatorship, communist country. And that might be right within the government, no doubt. But the regular Chinese people are much more, it's much different than the media portrays it. And this is in multiple countries that we may not have access to, as far as, I don't want to name countries, but if you have half a brain, you know what I'm talking about. So I think that's really cool. And Lawrence, what were you going to?
Oh, you said something earlier, Gus, and I think it's such a powerful statement. You said you didn't know what you didn't know then. And I feel like I say that on almost every podcast because I just look at my own life. I thought before I had my son, my best years were behind me. I'll never be as young and athletic, and I was very wealthy when I was young through trading. And I am 10 times happier today, even though my low back aches a bit more in the mornings and I'm a bit older. My energy is not the same. And the reason is because I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know the bond that I would have with my son and this huge element of life as a parent that's given me the greatest happiness. And I think that's such a powerful concept, is we don't know what we don't know, because it means that we have to be open to growing and learning and changing our mindset. And I think there's nothing sadder than someone that is thinking the same way they thought a decade ago. And I love it when I look back at maybe something I wrote or something I said or something I did years ago and cringing, because it means that I've evolved from them. I think it's actually a great compliment. So I just love the fact that you said that too.
You got to keep evolving and changing. And if my views on the world today are the same 20 years from now, it means I'm doing something massively wrong. You got to keep adapting your views, and because the world is changing, we are changing, everyone around us is changing. And if you stagnate in the way you think, it means you're living in an echo chamber, which is very easy to do these days. And I see it then a lot of people I know when it comes to politics, religion, economics, and you name it. Everyone is living in an echo chamber. And I think social media today makes it very easy, because you like something, it keeps coming on your feed, and then you dive into it more and you amplify the echo chamber. It's more active measurement to step outside of that little universe that has all your thoughts and points of views. It takes more active work to be able to expose yourself to something different. And I think it's very hard for people these days to open themselves to different points of views. And I think it's a little bit dangerous. And that's why people can't have a conversation. You see people on the left and right, no one wants to engage in an intelligent adult debate. Everyone solidly believes that their point of view is right, and there's no way that it could be wrong. And there's no engagement and dialogue and try to make this world a better place. We can't all be right about all our beliefs. Like if there's 10 things you and I disagree on, I'm probably wrong on at least 2 or 3 of them. I think my duty as a human being is to find what 2 or 3 or 4 points I could possibly be wrong and change my mind on it. And if I'm not putting myself in that mindset, I'm not doing myself a favor, and I'm not doing society a favor.
I think that's a wonderful point. And speaking about doing society a favor, fertility is a huge aspect of doing society a favor, especially depending on who you listen to. There's a lot of people that say that our global birth rates are declining. Now, I don't know if that's true or if that's just by particular first world countries like Japan, Korea, United States. I'm sure there are countries where the population is exploding, but you decided to go into a field where you help people conceive children and create populations and create future generations. What was your experience like when you were practicing? Because I should note that you're no longer you're still in the field, but you're not practicing. You'll explain that. What was practicing like for you? How did you start? And then how did you get your clinics and your company up and running?
Sure. So let's rewind back when I told you my idol was that fertility doctor, Dr. Brian Cameron, who I wanted to become. That was a big part of why I decided to do fertility. There's another smaller aspect. When I first got into OBGYN as a resident in training, I was very attracted to surgical oncology. So I wanted to do gynecologic oncology. I thought it was a fascinating field. The surgeries were intense and interesting and kind of rewarding, etc. But my first rotation on the gynecologic oncology ward, people were dying and it was a miserable experience. I would go home, I would cry. Like I had all these people that I was taking care of and a lot of them were dying and I was not a happy person. I was like, I cannot do something that I enjoy because the manual part is rewarding, but the mental part is draining. And the next rotation was an infertility rotation. I was relatively happy. So your worst outcome is your procedure doesn't work. Everyone is still alive and you have the chance to do it again next month. So that coupled with the fact that I really looked up to my mentor is why I decided to go down in this field. So fast forward in clinical practice, my first day in practice, again, I thought I was thinking things that end up not happening. I thought I was going to be in Lebanon for the rest of my life. That didn't happen. I thought I was going to be a practicing physician until the last day I show up to an office. That obviously didn't happen. When I started practice in Houston, my business partner, who was a physician, just like myself, him and I, we kind of grew a practice from a small 2-person practice to one of the larger practices in the Southwest United States. And by random chance, we met an investment banker who introduced us to private equity, and we were the first to bring private equity to the fertility space. So when we partnered with a PE firm out of Philly, and that was the first time I opened my mind to, well, we can take this little operation that we have and expand it to all these places, and we can serve all these patients. It took me down the business side of medicine. And at one point I was working 100% clinician, 100% business. And that quickly became unsustainable, mostly from a mental perspective, because even fertility clinically is very emotionally draining, even though it's rewarding. It's happy, bringing joy to people. But listening to these stories and struggles every day can have a toll on a person. And that coupled with trying to grow a network from a little Houston operation to Coast, and one point where before we did the next exit, we were, I think, up to 15 different cities we're in. It was a lot to juggle, and I had to give up either the business side or the clinical side. And I chose, I'm going to pursue the business pathway. I could do more good at that stage of my life. And we continued to grow the Houston operation, hiring doctors and partners and things like that. But I got sidetracked on the business side of medicine. And that opened my mind into a whole universe that I did not even know it existed. And that's why I became a non-practicing physician for the last at least 10 years, I would say.
So back to fertility. So John isn't going to know too much about this because he's not trying for kid number 2, but I am. So the thing with I listen to a lot of podcasts on male fertility, and it seems like one of the biggest problems right now is all the pollutants. So for instance, I got some blood work done and I'm very health conscious. I try to drink out of a metal container. I have my food in glass. I try and avoid plastic at all costs. Both my metal toxins and also my plastics were very high. So this doctor gave me like a 3-month detox, and I got a home sauna to try and detox this out. And I think, man, if that's me with all these plastics and toxins in my body, imagine the person who's not health conscious and they're not thinking about this. And it does seem like, it's so funny when you're young, as a young man, you're trying to not get the wrong girl pregnant. You know, when you're not in a serious relationship, you're not trying to start a family. And then suddenly you get to an age where you are trying for kids, and you hear this more and more. And I don't know if it's because, like John said, I don't know if the cases, it's harder to conceive, or you just hear it more. I know there's societally, we're having kids much later now. So women are less fertile, the men's sperm quality is not as good, but it does seem to be a massive problem. Do you follow like the current trends because you're no longer practicing? And do you have some tips and some basic things that people that maybe someone listening doesn't want to have kids today, but they're in their late 30s and they'd like to have kids in the next 5 years? And there's probably some lifestyle changes that would be really important.
All great questions, and there's not a simple answer to any of that stuff. So back to the fertility rates that John was mentioning, it's absolutely true. Fertility rates are dropping mostly among modern, westernized, first world countries. And some countries is dangerously low. Like if you look at South Korea or Japan, they continue at that rate. They're almost on extinction pathway. Like within 3 generations, they're almost non-existent when you have 0.7, 0.8% fertility rate. Whereas the replacement for a couple is you need like 2.1 or 2.3 babies per couple to have just replacement. So in the US for the past decade or so, we've been barely below replacement, or we do have good integration here that kind of more than makes up for it. If you look at countries like Japan and South Korea and some of the other ones in Europe as well, they're way below replacement value. So there's a conscious effort on some societies not to have as many kids, whether it's an economic pressure or social pressure, whatever it is. Mostly economic, I would say. But for some reason, the more a society is well off, the less kids they want to have. I can't put my finger on it. Why is that? Because they can afford to have more kids than poor people in India or Africa, but people in India and Africa are having more, maybe because they can't prevent them or don't know how to prevent them. But that being said, the fertility rates are dropping as well. Our infertility rate is increasing in modern societies due to many reasons. You mentioned a big one. People are waiting late. And that time factor is way more critical in women than in men, because women have a biological clock and they're born within a finite number of eggs. And as they age, that number of eggs, one, drops, but more importantly, the quality of their eggs starts dropping dramatically. And after 35, that quality of eggs takes a nosedive to a point where if you take a 43, 44-year-old woman, almost sterile because her egg quality is so bad, even though she's not in menopause yet, she still has some eggs, she ovulates, she has her period. She could be the healthiest woman on the planet, but her egg quality is bad due to nothing that she's done, due to sheer factor that she's 43 or 44 years old. And in the past, people did not have the education that, hey, my age as a woman is extremely important for my fertility. And women were having kids when they were 20, 21, 22 years old. By 25, their family was completed. Yeah. The average age of a woman to have her first child is late 20s, early 30s. And that number keeps creeping up and up as women advance their careers and think, well, I'm not ready for it now. I want to accomplish certain things in my education and my career, and they kick that can down the road, and a lot of times it becomes a little bit too late, or they need the help of someone like myself to help her achieve her family goals. So age is a big one. Does age have an impact on men? Absolutely it does, but it is dwarfed compared to that effect on women. Number 2, all these toxins that you mentioned that we're exposed to become like a rite of passage for us. Like you got to be exposed to toxins. It's unavoidable. We take it for granted that things that we breathe, the air that we breathe, things we ingest, the food that we eat, medicines we keep injecting or ingesting, we take it for granted that they have no effect on us, but that is not true. They all have bad effects on sperm and egg, and especially sperm for guys. And that's why you can take someone who's as healthy as you are, and you can check an every box when it comes to taking care of yourself and your body, and yet you're still exposed to a lot of bad things, and these have a lot of bad effects on sperm, and a lot of them are irreversible. So some things that affect the testicle and sperm production are reversible, but a lot of them are not. The beauty of being a man is you produce millions and millions of sperm, and with the appropriate help, you can always find a way to use those few sperm cells that you may have to be able to achieve a pregnancy. A lot of times in women, we don't have that luxury.
Gus, can I ask, and I apologize, I don't know if this is a conversation I had with you, or I do know a few OBGYNs in Chicago, and we have a mutual friend, Lawrence and I, that you would love. He's Lebanese, and he has a boat here in Chicago. And so we go on the boat, and he has a lot of, because he's Lebanese, of course, he has a lot of Lebanese friends who are physicians.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of couples who have gone through fertility treatments, or I should say they were unsuccessful in having children or in conceiving. And they went to fertility clinics, they tried, they almost gave up hope. And then usually like at the 11th hour, it happened, they got pregnant. Sometimes they're twins, right? Because a lot of people may or may not know that if you do IVF, there's a chance that, I don't know what it would be, embryos are whatever. You're having 2 kids instead of 1. You're getting 2 for 1. You're getting your money's worth. But I have heard so many stories, both anecdotally, like on the news, and also I know people who can't conceive for shit. And then they get pregnant via IVR, via fertility clinics. And then like a year later, they have a kid naturally. Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. And can you explain, because I know someone, and I don't know if it was you or somebody else, that there was kind of a science behind that. Can you explain that phenomenon a little bit in your opinion?
There's a little bit of science behind it. You described 2 things, so I'll get into them one after the other. The first one is someone who's had no kids and they tried so hard, etc., and then randomly they get pregnant. So that's one scenario. The second scenario that I'll talk more about is they go through treatment after struggling for a long time, then they get pregnant on their own afterwards. These are 2 different animals. The first one, I want listeners to get that false hope that this is a very common thing. These rare instances, and they stand out because they're very happy stories and great stories, and people talk about them, but they don't talk about the failures that never happened, which are way more than those few or handful that do happen to them. And it's great when that happens, but it's not a very common occurrence. So most people are struggling with infertility. The chances are they're not going to be able to conceive on their own. A very small percentage will, and they're going to be very vocal. They do stand out in society, and we remember them. They get imprinted in our minds, and that's why you're talking about them. Not a very common occurrence. So I don't want people who are struggling to think that this is going to be the best path for them, is not to get stressed about it and it's going to happen. And then they miss an opportunity as they get older. So they need to be seeking help. We'll fast forward to the second scenario. Someone who's struggling with infertility, they go through IVF, and then a year later on their own, they get pregnant. Most of the time, there's a condition called endometriosis, which is a very common condition in women. The best treatment for endometriosis is actually a pregnancy. So the good treatment for endometriosis is a high dose of progesterone, which is one of the hormones produced by the ovaries in women. And when a woman is pregnant, she has 9 months of super high progesterone levels. And it almost like kills those endometriosis cells that she has inside her abdomen and pelvis. And now that the endometriosis is gone due to the pregnancy, her condition is, for the most part, cured. And when she delivers her baby and tries again on her own and they get pregnant and a heartbeat, usually that would be the explanation for those. Now, there are other conditions that are not treated by being pregnant, and people just get lucky. That could happen. But I would bet money that 9 out of 10 people who experience this specific situation, the woman probably had endometriosis, which she may or may not have known about it.
I really want to segue into health in general, because I know this is a wheelhouse that you and Lawrence will probably dominate for the rest of our discussion. But before we talk about your personal views on health and kind of your evolution into your own health and a lot of these changes that you've made with yourself, and I also do want to talk about your mother. Pretty incredible story. And I know Lawrence will, again, it will be a kind of a back and forth between you and Lawrence, because you align very much on these things. But just very quickly, going back to being an immigrant and being successful and I know I asked you this question when I saw you in person, but looking back now at the success you had in scaling your businesses and getting all that injection of PE money and then selling portions of your business or parts of it, did that change you as a person? Did you ever think you'd become that financially successful? I guess, because you have a car collection that most people would die for. I'm just saying, we have a buddy, Mo, who is, hopefully he listens to this. He's one of our good friends, and he's a very wealthy guy. And if he saw your car collection, just what you have in your home, which is just not all of them. It's the coolest thing, by the way. For the listeners, he literally has inside his house, not only does he have a garage outside, but on the inside, he has this beautiful custom glass paneling where he keeps, like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 cars. And they're beautiful cars. That's all I can say about them. We're not going to tell people his address, but did that change you? Was that like, holy shit, man? You woke up one day and you're like, I have 7 figures in the bank and whatnot, or how was that experience?
Great question and very complicated answer. When I moved to the US, I didn't have a lot of money. I literally moved with $4,500 or $4,000 that my parents gave me. I did not grow up in a wealthy family. My family was very educated. My dad was a professor at the American University of Beirut, but due to the bad inflation that Lebanon experienced, my parents were not well off by any means. We were your typical middle class, highly educated family. And my parents valued education a lot and instilled it in myself, my brother and sister, and they pushed us to pursue degrees and our passion through studying. And I am here for the sole reason that my parents pushed me in that direction. I'm very thankful for that. But when you come from a background where you're not privileged and you get the sudden exposure to a lot of money, that can and will change you. And it can catch you off guard because you're not used to having that wealth. You're not used to how people treat you when they know that you have wealth. And that changes your perspective most of the time, not in a good way. It changes the way you interact with people, how you view yourself. The ego gets inflated massively. Money is a very dangerous tool, and it can be a force of good, but it can also be a force for very bad things. And no one teaches you how to handle it. And if I can look back in time, there was a short phase where you experience that wealth suddenly, that it catches you doing things that are probably not the best reflection of who you could be. And it takes a conscious effort for you to pump the brakes on that pathway you're taking, reverse course, and try to stick to the mission that set you on that course to start with. And I've seen many people fail or not even realize that they had to do this. And I see them go down a pathway that is not the best. They end up not the best version of who they could be. They end up a force of negativity in society, and they don't even realize it. And at one point, I saw myself going down in that direction, and I don't know what made me realize it. And I reversed course pretty quickly. And I like to think that I continue to go down the right path, where money is a tool, but it's not a goal. And if you stick to the mission, the money will follow, but it should not be your primary objective. And if your primary objective is, I want to get wealthy, I think, number one, you're less likely to achieve wealth. Number two, if you do achieve it, you're very likely to misuse it and mishandle it and not be the best person that you could be.
Yeah, I love talking about money because I think it's such an important thing. Depending on how you're raised, a lot of people either see money is the root of all evil, or at the other extreme, they will sacrifice their health and their kids growing up and their best friends in the pursuit of wealth, thinking that if I get the wealth, everything else will take care of itself. Where in reality, if you neglect everything else to get the wealth, often you only realize when it's too late, you don't have it. And I didn't realize it at the time, but through trading, I became a millionaire before I was 30. And it was such a wonderful blessing because it made me realize I always chased money in my 20s because I had this dream to be a professional fighter. And when I achieved the wealth, I gave away my trading company, which was very stupid. I should have kept ownership, but I just gave it away to one of my star traders. And I spent 5 years sabbatical just fighting and making every mistake a young man can make with his money. But I love what you said. There's a wonderful book by Andrew Wilkinson, who's a CEO, like one of those, he's grown and sold a lot of companies, and he's a billionaire, and it's called Never Enough. And what he said is he's from a small town in Canada, and he became multimillionaire, then eventually a billionaire. And he said he would be around these other billionaires, and every single, it doesn't matter how rich they are, they've compared, if they were a multi-billionaire, they would complain that they don't have Elon Musk level of money or Jeff Bezos. So it'd always be that comparison where they would value everything through money, and it doesn't matter how wealthy, they weren't happy. And it's such a good message to repeat, because if there's one message that I want to share, it's not that I think money is very important as a tool. You can buy back your freedom, and you can craft your life with money to do things that enrich you, and you can buy back your time and tasks that you don't like doing. But I think it's so important for people to know that don't give up the things that are important. Like with my 4-year-old, the biggest blessing of being a parent is I realized before him, every year would go by and it meant nothing to me. I didn't appreciate the value of my time. Whereas now, if I have to work late and I miss taking him to the park, I get a little grumpy. And it's these little things, like I appreciate time so much more. So if there's a message for me, it's don't pursue money at the expense of all these other things, thinking that if you're not happy without riches, that riches will make you happy. I think money is just an amplifier. So if you're poor and happy, you'll be wealthy and happy. But if you're poor and miserable, and I put a few zeros on your bank account, you'll just be wealthy and miserable.
Lawrence, I'm going to shamelessly steal that phrase that you said. Money will amplify things. It'll amplify the good. It'll also amplify the bad. I love how you phrase it. I couldn't agree more with what you just said.
But what about this though? Because you're a parent. So I think you and I probably grew up in a family where my parents both valued education, but very lower middle class. We didn't have much. I never had much growing up. And I think that it was good for me. I always wonder, would I have that same work ethic and drive if on my 16th birthday, my dad would have bought me a BMW? And if I'd had all these things given to me at a young age. I've been working since I was 12 years old, and my dad he gave me an incredible childhood, but he gave me nothing monetarily because he wanted me to earn it. So I think now as a parent, it's hard enough to be successful, Gus, and then you achieve a level of success, and then suddenly you've got to worry about, well, I don't want to spoil my daughters. So have you had to navigate how you've approached that?
If you ask me, what's my biggest worry today? My biggest worry is if my kids get complacent in life because they've had a lot of things handed to them and taken for granted. And I try to educate them, and I'm not sure if I'm doing a perfect job or even a good job. I hope I am. But I do want them to be motivated and not take things for granted. And I have these discussions with them all the time. I try to keep them grounded and try to keep them motivated in life and to pursue their passions. And things are not going to be handed to them on their own. And one thing I make very clear to them, that whatever riches they see around them is not for them. This is for their mom and for their dad. And once they flourish and they're able to fly on their own, they're going to have to hunt for their own food. And it's not going to be handed to them forever. I try to keep that messaging to them as much as possible. Will it create the same drive that was forced on me growing up in a middle-class family in Beirut? Probably not. And I'm not sure I could replicate the environmental conditions that I grew up in that pushed me and gave me the drive. All I can do is instill the values in my kids and teach them that drive needs to exist. And they may not have that same push and pressures that I did, but if at least they're conscious of it and aware of it. I'm hoping, and hope is never a strategy, but sometimes it's all you have. I'm hoping that would be enough to drive for them to be driven to accomplish things in life and be the person that they could be.
I had the pleasure of meeting one of your daughters. And she's lovely. And it's interesting because I almost think that you're expressing your concern that environment is an issue, but I also think there's a little bit of nature versus nurture in that, because there's a lot of people who grew up in Lebanon in a similar family as you in a similar setting, and they probably were not nearly as motivated as you to go out and do things. So I don't want to say that you're not giving yourself credit or that you're assuming too much about environment, but I do think that a lot of it is dependent on the individual too. You can't, like, your kids are, I know a lot of, I'm in real estate, right? So I know a lot of people that are very wealthy and they have lots of properties, and their children have trusts and properties, or they're buying their children properties. Their kids are lucky enough to be able to get nice homes purchased for them. And I do know that once in a while you'll have an asshole client or a family that they're just very pompous, and they think because they have wealth that they're entitled to be assholes. And you can see that in their children. Usually you can see that air of indignance and that pompousness and that attitude. But on the flip side, I do see people who express concern that if I give my children too much, that it's going to backfire and they're just not going to do anything. But I think that all you can do, and I'm not even a parent. So you have the one guy talking right now who's not a parent, doesn't have kids that he knows about. And all you can do in this life is the best you can do. So my dad used to say, do the best that you can. And after that, it's not in your hands. And so you try to be the best father you can be. You try to raise your children the best way you know how, but you can't control. Inevitably, you're a man of science or pseudoscience, depending on what people think about this, the crux of the conversation, which is still coming, or I should say some of the interesting conversation. But I think you've instilled wonderful values in your daughters, and it doesn't get, I mean, that's a really good start. If they're good people and they have good values and they're healthy and they're relatively happy, I think that's a really good foundation.
Assessment. I want to give you credit where I think you're undercutting yourself a little bit. True, you don't have kids, but in your line of business, you get to see people in their most vulnerable moments looking for a house. And you see the true nature of these people and these discussions when they're looking for a house. And that's a perspective that not many people have the opportunity to study or look at and evaluate. And I think the feedback that you get from walking into future homes of people and the things that they say in that very special private environment is priceless. And that would give you a lot of information to make strong opinions that I think hold a lot of value, John.
It's very interesting when you look at married couples looking at houses, when you can see how their relationship is and how their marriage is by the way they talk about it and the way they make the decision. Because especially when if one of them absolutely loves a place and the other one is kind of on the fence about it, I mean, I know it's kind of a cliche, but that idea of a happy wife, a happy life, I think there's something to be said for, in a good relationship, it's a lot of give and take. And I never thought about that before, but you just said it perfectly. You definitely see a window into their relationship because it's such a emotional purchase, especially if you have kids. It's the place where you're going to raise your kids. And there's so many.
On that note, I just want to say, Lawrence, it's funny because when I first stepped into Gus's house, it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous home. It's stunning. And I looked at some of the fixtures and I went into his kitchen and I was looking at the appliances and looking at the interior design. And I was like, damn, this is incredible. Well, what was your perspective and what are you trying to accomplish? And you said something very funny, which was along the lines of, I let my wife handle it all. Or something. I just wrote the checks. She has great taste. I know she worked with a designer, but I think there is in relationships and in homes. And I experienced this. I was engaged and we did live in a beautiful home, my ex-fiance and I. It was gorgeous. Her dad helped us procure that home. There's no way we would have been able to afford it. But I just let her, after a while, I didn't say shit. I was just like, you know what? You're going to do what you want to do anyways. So have at it. But we've been talking a while and there's still so much more interesting stuff that I want to get to. And I know that we have time constraints, but can you start off by telling us a little bit about your health and what you decided, the decisions you decided to make within the last decade about your health and what prompted that. So what kind of lifestyle do you live now? I could tell the audience you're vegan, but there's much more to it. So kind of led up to that, and when did this all take place? Give us the down low.
There's a lot to unpack in that question. First, it's been an evolution for me. Being a physician trained in Western medicine, I am the product of Western medicine, though I had to step out of that shell and reevaluate my vantage point, my points of views, my convictions about what health is, what medicine is, and what lifestyle is. What they teach us in Western medicine, which made me who I am from a professional perspective. A lot of things I agree with, but a lot of things I strongly question, and a lot of things I strongly disagree with. And I think in the interest of science, we have to question everything. And nothing is gospel, for the lack of a better word to describe it. Otherwise, we're talking about a different religion and not science. And I think Western medicine, the way it is taught today, there's a very strong religious flavor that goes with it, that this is what's right and everything else is wrong. And if you dare question it, you're going to be in trouble, or you don't belong in this ecosystem. And I think we saw these things amplified significantly when COVID hit, when people were questioning certain things, and every single one of them was shut down. Fast forward 2 years, almost every single one of those turned out to be true. And were we truly practicing science when that happens? And you mentioned the story of my mom, and I can mention hundreds of other stories that are very similar, where if you stick to Western medicine alone, you wouldn't have the outcome that we could have, the best outcome. So I want to start by saying that Western medicine is not evil, but it's not the answer to everything. And there's a lot of conflicts of interest that go into what we call today Western medicine and medical education. The conflicts of interest are big pharma, big food, and all the medical academic institutions, the medical schools, universities, as well as the medical journals. And that conflict of interest and the revolving door between people that are in charge of all these things and the FDA here in America, especially, and the rest of the world looks up to America as the ultimate medical mecca, for the lack of a better word. And whatever we do here is taken for granted and taught all over. I was taught in Beirut, American medicine at the American University of Beirut, and so were all of my friends across the world that were not in the U.S. So what happens in America is has an impact on what happens in the rest of the world. So, that being said, up until maybe 8-9 years ago, I was brainwashed. I was like, this is Western medicine. Everything they teach is 100% the truth and nothing but the truth. And everyone who dabbles into a different approach is a charlatan or someone who is, pseudoscience, or put it in that category of things not to be taken seriously. COVID opened up my mind, because early on, I'll give you a little example, like the data was clear that young people were fine, 4-year-old kids, 10-year-old, 15-year-old kids, they were fine. Nothing happened to them, short of someone being immune compromised for a reason. Why were we pushing the vaccines on these younger kids, a new platform that we had no idea what their future side effects could be? Why are we pushing them on people who are almost at zero risk from this virus? And you have that older populations at higher risk, we should be prioritizing these vulnerable people. Why are we pushing it on young people? 2-year-old, 6 months old, pregnant woman. How could they come and say we have data on pregnant women where it hasn't been a year since the vaccine's been out? These women have not delivered. How can we say that it's safe in pregnancy? And I remember me being in women's health, people coming out and speaking, oh, it's been shown to be safe in pregnancy. Show me the data. There's no data that's safe in pregnancy. It takes 9 months to pop a baby, and it takes at least several years to monitor the offspring. We haven't had that time. How can you make a statement that is safe and pregnancy. So all these things that were happening made me question the mainstream narrative. And then that thing happened with my mom. And my mom is a relatively healthy, late 70s woman whose mom, so my grandma died from Alzheimer's disease. And my mom's grandma, so my great grandmother, also died of Alzheimer's. So we know it's in the family, and I've been taught in medical school, dementia or Alzheimer's disease is something that happens that you cannot prevent, that it's caused by these amyloid protein deposits that we see in the brain when you do autopsies on people. And there's nothing you can do to prevent it or to reverse it, etc. And I believe that's what I was taught in medical school. And there's a pill that you could take that's been around since at least I was in medical school 30 years ago or whatever. And it helps with the symptoms, but it's not going to cure. And that's all you can do. And hope is your strategy when it comes to that. And they're going to eventually die from Alzheimer's. So my mom was visiting here in the US, and I noticed she was not herself, messing things up a little bit. I'm not going to go into details, but I took her to a friend of mine who's a neurologist, trained like myself in Western medicine. He did every test under the sun, and every single one of them was Alzheimer's. So CT scan, PET scan, MRI, EEG, clinical exam, you name it, all just Alzheimer's. And he prescribed that medication to her, and she had come back in 6 weeks. Thankfully, a good friend of mine who's a physician who has opened up his mind, he's ahead of his time, so way before me, into different approaches and diet and lifestyle. He calls me up. He knew I was going to see that doctor. He's like, watch these 2 videos I'm going to send you, and then let's discuss after them. Right? And I watched them, and you watch these 2 videos and you clearly understand that Alzheimer's is not a random neurodegenerative disease. The brain is not dying for no reason. Those amyloid deposits that we see are not the cause of Alzheimer's. They're a product, a result of the Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is diabetes in the brain, just like you get diabetes in your body and you're insulin resistant. And it's a culmination of your poor choices in diet and lifestyle. And different people have different genetic susceptibilities to these lifestyles. So you can take 2 people with the same lifestyle, and one will get it, one will not. True. But if you remove the offending factors, you can prevent diabetes in the brain, i.e. Alzheimer's. And the brain, as an organ, functions on glucose, but it can also function on ketones. And normally, we don't make a lot of ketones. So if you have diabetes in the brain, your brain is unable to utilize that glucose in your blood. You can have very high glucose, and the brain is unable to use it for energy. And it's a very energy-consuming organ, and it's going to die. When it dies, you see these amyloid deposits from the dying brain cells. They're a result of the brain dying, not the cause of it. And every pharmaceutical drug that's being developed is targeting ways to prevent amyloid deposits in the brain. Well, that is not, that you're treating a symptom in a disease. You're not treating the root cause of the disease. The root cause is the brain has diabetes. And I'm using simplistic words a little bit here. It's probably a little bit more complex than that. But for the sake of this discussion, that should suffice. So my friend tells me, well, let's give her coconut oil. Coconut oil is like 90% medium chain triglycerides, which your liver will turn into ketones. And they can use that ketones as fuel and can thrive while you reverse the diabetes. So I did that. And I put her also on a ketogenic diet just as an extra measure. Within a few days, I could see she's a different person. She's at 50% maybe better within 3 days or a week. Within 6 weeks, she was like over 90% better. Within few months, she's like reversed aging by 10 years. Like she got to a point where she's remembering things where I don't want her to remember. Like this is too much. Maybe you should dial back the coconut oil a little bit, and you shouldn't be remembering these things I used to do when I was a kid. But it was impressive. And then she went back to Lebanon, living on her own, driving, doing her things. And it's been about 4 or 5 years since then. She's literally the youngest 79 or 80-year-old person she's listening to this, maybe I'm misquoting her age, and she kind of give me a hard time for calling her 80. Maybe she's not quite 80, but it's impressive, the transformation. And a lot of my friends who have parents struggling or uncles or aunts struggling with dementia and Alzheimer's, I've told them about it, and the same identical result time and time again. And apparently this data has been out for at least 20 years. And why is this not in mainstream medicine? Why are we not teaching lifestyle modifications properly? And why are we not teaching that Alzheimer's is a lifestyle disease? It's not something that is inevitable that you're going to have to live with and die from. It's preventable. Same for hypertension, same for type 2 diabetes, same for heart disease. Every single one of these chronic conditions is a lifestyle disease. It's a dietary disease that is preventable in every single person. And I will repeat, yes, different people will respond differently to environmental and dietary stimuli. And sometimes someone can take an abusive diet that is very unhealthy and be fine, while an identical person or a different person with an identical lifestyle or diet could develop all these diseases. But if you take away the offending factor, none of these two people will have it. And that's the point.
Gus, I just want to interject for a second. I am the skeptic amongst the three of us, and I respect you tremendously. I look up to you. I think what we were talking about earlier about opening your mind up and not always being right and keeping an open mind is really important. And I have started, since we talked, I have started doing some research once you told me this, and I find it very interesting. I wouldn't call it, I do think there's obviously different approaches to health, and I think that big pharma is a big deal. And I think that now we have RFK as our HHS, and that's important. Some people love him. Some people think he's a quack. It doesn't matter. But before Lawrence picks your brain, because I know, no pun intended, because I know he's going to, and we want to hear about your health quickly and what you do. Did your mom stay on that protocol once she went back to Lebanon?
Yeah. So, err on the side of safety. I just kept her on that same protocol where she takes the coconut oil every day. I even overdid it and give her ketone extra pills to take and put her on a ketogenic diet, which she does not adhere to today like she did before. But her health has reversed completely. She's off all medication. She's not on any blood pressure, diabetes medications. She was on a bunch of things that we took her off, and because she doesn't need them anymore because she's changed her lifestyle. But yeah, I keep her on that same regimen. This is her new lifestyle. And the way I like to look at diets, because the word diet and kind of has that inherent punishment in it, that you're punishing yourself, you're depriving yourself of certain things in life that are so pleasurable, but you're on a diet. It's a temporary thing. You do it, you achieve an objective, you revert back to your old lifestyle. Wrong. Diet should be your lifestyle. You should embrace it, enjoy it, and it can be extremely pleasurable, whichever dietary lifestyle that you think fits your health best. If you go down that path where you stick to it, it should not be a temporary thing that you do in January because you had some New Year resolution, and then February 1st, you go back to your old habits because you haven't done anything. It should be your lifestyle, and then you can see how your body reacts. So if the product is good, you can have good results and you stick to it. And if it's not, then you need to reevaluate that diet or lifestyle in the first place.
I absolutely love that. Wasn't it the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, who said, "Let food be thy medicine"? And it's so important. There's one thing, Gus, that one of my favorite books is called Consilience by Edward Wilson, who just passed away. He was a biologist. He used to study ants, and then he looked at the ant colonies, and he wrote all these books on human nature and biology. And it was a very sensitive subject. People don't like to be compared to humans. A lot of people think humans are above animals, but there's all these different things we can learn from animal kingdom. But he wrote this book towards the end of his career called Consilience, and it was basically like, he had all the different types of knowledge, and he tried to see where is the crossover. And I just think when it comes to, like you said, the skepticism we saw it all during COVID, but even just as a dad now, I completely believe Northwestern's wonderful hospital. I'll do whatever vaccine schedule they say for my son. He got all these vaccines when he was young. And then you start researching, like, well, why is this kid who's 15, 16, 17 years away from having sex having vaccines against STDs? Well, it's because that the lobbyists lobby to put them into the program and all these different things. So I think as a parent, it's our duty to question everything. I just think it's so important. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because talking about that idea of consilience is when knowledge overlaps. I just released a podcast today with a lady, Jen, and she had all these tumors and they wanted to do multiple surgeries. And she said, I just need some time. And she did a complete holistic approach and healed herself. And again, like with your mother, these are anecdotal stories, but they're real. And it's so important that we don't, like you said, Western medicine for some things is amazing. If I get in a car accident, I want Western medicine to stitch me up. If I'm having problems conceiving, I want to do IVF treatment, but Western medicine. But like you said, it's not the be all and end all. And I'm 2/3 of the way through this audiobook, and it's by Dr. Georgia Ede, and it's called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. So change your diet, change your mind. It talks about all these issues with our mind, like that you can heal through diet. And she starts off the book by saying, there's all these things that we just take for granted. So for instance, every morning I make a shake and I put all these different ingredients in, and they all have a purpose. I put protein powder because I want protein first thing. And one of the things I put in there is I put blueberries, because I heard that blueberries are great as an antioxidant. And she said, that is parroted as modern wisdom. Blueberries are an antioxidant. She said, if you look back, it was from a paper released by several Harvard scientists who were very credentialed. And they did it by asking a survey of random people, like what they eat the last decade. It's so like, there's no way you can isolate whether it was blueberries that were causing these effects. So, and she gives hundreds and hundreds of examples of all these different things. It's things we take for granted that aren't necessarily true, or there's just that it's so, when you do studies with food, it's so hard to isolate things. And so people just tweak the data to push whatever narrative they're trying to push. But the overriding message is you can change all these different symptoms in your mind through your diet. And I believe that 100%. I know that when I eat really well and I exercise every day, I have way more positive thoughts. I'm in a good mindset. I'm focused. And if I have a shitty diet and then you add on bad sleep on top of it, everything goes to shit. Like I'm less happy. I'm more irritable, all these different things. So diet is just so important. And even things that's so frustrating, because we were just saying how much we love America, but I love Italy. I love going to Italy. Every time I go to Italy, you can go out and you can just gorge on a pizza or a bowl of pasta. And then you take a walk around the little town you're in and you feel great. You just don't have that bloatedness you have here because they have such pure ingredients. And it's so tough that with all the things we have to worry about, paying the bills, being good at your job, now you got to look into what vaccines my kids are getting. Should I do this? You got to look at what you're putting in your body, because there's just so many bad things in the food system. So I'm a huge fan of RFK. And even if he's wrong about everything, which obviously he's not, but even you have to ask, at least he's asking the questions. At least we're looking into these things. But the fact of the matter is they can sell things in the US that the same company has to adapt in Canada or in England, because they won't allow all these bad ingredients. But for years, like you said, big food has just allowed all this stuff. So actually, this book I'm reading, that Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, is one of those, it's an audiobook, and I don't retain information on audio as I do with paper books. It's one of those books where I know I'm going to listen to it 2 or 3 times, because there's just so much value in there. So I'm so glad you said that. I just think if there's one thing that people get from this conversation, it's look at holistic ways to be our best self. And so with you, it sounds like John, kind of, we were talking a bit off air, was giving me the lowdown on you. He said you kind of changed your own lifestyle in the last few years. Can you talk a little bit about like what you do and how you feel compared to maybe before you made the changes?
Sure. I'll go back to a time when I was super healthy, then I went to a transitional phase where not so much healthy, and then back to being healthy. So in high school, I played basketball, and college, I played basketball. Actually played a couple of years professional in Lebanon, which is nowhere close to be level of professional basketball like here in the US. But you got to be in good shape to play basketball at any level. 6-pack, rib, super healthy. But when you're 18 or 20 years old, you could get away with eating junk, still being relatively healthy. And I used to subscribe to the wrong theory that you can work out your way out of any diet. And now my mindset is you are what you eat. You put in junk, your output's going to be junk. When you're younger, your body is more resilient and can overcome those deficiencies in the input that you're putting into it, your ingestion of toxic food and bad things. But it only lasts you for so long. After a certain age, your body cannot overcome the bad quality food that you put in it. And then you start getting obese and diabetes and all these things. So in medical school, I didn't have as much time to work out and practice like I did before. And my food habits were not the best. I was drinking sodas and a lot of sugar and crappy burgers and different things like that. And I started gaining weight. I went from having a 6-pack to my jeans. I need to go up a size or 2. I was never like super obese or anything, but you look at me, there's no 6-pack and I could lose a few pounds. But you think it's a rite of passage. You got to go through this normal phase as an adult. As you look around you, everyone has a gut and mine is the smallest out of all my friends. I'm in good shape. But I noticed even my blood pressure was, when we check in medical school having fun, my blood pressure is a little bit higher than it needs to be. And they teach you in medical school about hypertension. No one tells you that it's a lifestyle dietary disease, that no one should have what we call essential hypertension, which is just hypertension for no obvious reason. Looking back, it's me being unhealthy and a little bit overweight, and is what caused it. Now, it was not to a point where it needed any medication, but something that bugged me is like, hey, I'm supposed to be healthy and still working out a little bit. Why do I have high blood pressure? And I never took care of myself through medical school or until my last year of residency. So I was like 28 years old. I had a little bit more free time as a senior resident, chief resident, and the younger residents are doing most of the work. I have a little more free time. I was working out. I got really in shape, eating a little bit better, avoiding bad carbs and things like that. And my 6-pack came back again. Like, that's interesting. And I sustained this up until I moved to Houston and I started work, and I was working super hard. And I was missing important life events, daughters' birthdays and all these things because I was working so hard. And within a year or two, I started telling my wife, like, who's putting my jeans in the dryer on that high setting? Because they're shrinking so much. I swear this is a true story. Like, that's how much in denial you become. You don't want to believe that your weight is kind of creeping up on you and no one's touching your jeans. We air dry them like we do everything else for things that have potential to shrink. I was like, And I was doing my life insurance, and the lady comes in with a scale to my house to do all my blood tests and everything and my weight. Step on the weight, 175 pounds in my mind. That's where I've been most of my life. 196. So 21 pounds more than I needed to be. And that was a wake-up call for me. So initially, again, you're in denial. I told her, listen, I think there's something wrong with your scale. It's reading 21 pounds over. Maybe you should calibrate it. It's like, I've used it all day. No one mentioned anything. And she knows her weight. She steps on it and it's fine. I told her, I'm not accepting this. She's like, you're welcome to come to our office. We have that sliding scale with the weights that move. Like, yeah, I'm coming tomorrow to your office. What time do you open? She's like, fuck, I was there 8:55. I want to see my weight. I walk in and they measure me 196 pounds. And it's like a light bulb just went off in my mind. It's like, all right, I'm obviously on the wrong way here. And I started getting into diet and different things. And so I started working out. I started avoiding sugar. I cut out sodas completely. The first thing I dropped from my diet, and we're talking like 2010 or 11. I dropped all the obvious junk, sodas, sweeteners, different things that are obviously bad for you. I stopped complex, bad, over-processed carbohydrates. I was not vegan yet. And I started working out religiously and I started shrinking and getting back in shape. My weight immediately dropped to 175. My blood levels were all better. My cholesterol for the life insurance was a little bit high, immediately dropped back to amazing results. And I've sustained it since then. Remember my friend who told me about my mom and the 2 videos I should watch. And he mentioned intermittent fasting to me once. So I was like, I researched it a little bit, like I'm going to start doing intermittent fasting. And I've been doing it for the good part of 10 years, and it's changed my life as well. Like that little extra layer of fat that you could never get rid of, boom, it kind of melted away with it. And I feel better. I have more energy. I'll wake up in the morning, I'll do a full workout fasting, and we'll fast for another 3-4 hours before I eat again.
Wow.
Plenty of energy in me. And if you do the calculation of how much energy you carry in your fat spores and your fat cells, it's impressive that if you take the slimmest, healthiest adult who has 9% body fat, they can live for about 3 months without food based on the number of calories they carry in that small percentage of fat cells that they have. So you can imagine someone who's 15 to 20, your typical super healthy adult, you can go for about 4 to 6 months without food. I'm not saying you should. It's not good to do it. My point is, you don't need to be eating 3 times a day. You don't need to be eating, around the clock. Giving your body a break from food, allowing that your body, your metabolism to tap into your stores. It's not a one-way road where you store fat. You need to tap into it back and forth. And the intermittent fasting allows that recycling to happen. And I'm a big believer. It worked for me. It worked for pretty much every person I've had that discussion with who played with it a little bit. And different people need to fast for different hours. There's no one size fits all when it comes to fasting. I fast 16 to 20 hours, sometimes more. Some people need to fast minimum 18. Some people need to fast, do an occasional 24-hour or more. I think it's as long as you're doing some form of fasting, you incorporate that into your lifestyle, very important. Then the next part is what you ingest. And I lived my life as an omnivore, and I became vegan in 2015, March or April 2015. I have that exact day on my phone, on my calendar. I just keep it as a reminder. I did not become vegan for health reasons, even though it has a lot of health benefits. I became vegan for ethical considerations. And it was something that was bugging me for a few years, and I've researched it a lot, read books, watched documentaries, and woke up one day is like, I can't do it anymore. I'm going to become vegan. So it was not health considerations that attracted me to that particular diet. That said, I learned about the health benefits of a proper vegan diet. And I use the word proper because you can be on an improper or unhealthy vegan diet, even though you have to actively do it. If you go on a vegan diet, kind of by default, you're eating vegetables and fruits and healthy organic stuff. But if you want to consume Oreos, and Oreos are vegan, some factory, someone forgot to put milk in that little white part, so they're technically vegan. If you eat Oreos and French fries and Coca-Cola, you will be a very unhealthy vegan. Most vegans I know do not consume these nasty, toxic products. I learned about the health benefits of being vegan, but I'm not one of those pragmatic, plant-based people who will preach it and that's the only way and shame on you for consuming animals. I believe you could be a healthy omnivore, you could be a healthy herbivore, like vegan or plant-based. Apologize for the background. My wife and kid, my daughter, they having a good time somewhere. I'll go tell them to eat. I strongly believe that you could be healthy on different kinds of diets. A ketogenic diet is another healthy diet that I believe in. So it's not necessarily one size fits all, but you got to consume good products.
Yeah.
To incorporate fasting somewhere in that lifestyle, and I think you're going to be all right.
No, I love that. And that's so true. People think, yeah, oh, I'm a healthy vegan, but if you're eating processed food, that's very unhealthy. So yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I can see that you're not dogmatic. Like you said, there's many different diets. And I live in the country, and I fed with my 4-year-old son. We fed the sheep and the cows across the street. There's a bunch there. He's like, Daddy, can we feed them? And we're feeding these cows, and they were so sweet. And I do feel I don't feel good. I love to eat red meat. I don't eat it a couple of times a week, and I feel really good when I eat it. And there's definitely, I was talking to my wife last night. I said, yeah, I really don't like that, the ethical component. I'm an animal lover. So yeah, I got to figure that out. But it's been so fun. We'll have to do part 2, because I wanted to ask you about all this other stuff, entrepreneurship. I want some parenting advice one day. But no, I really appreciate your time. And this was so great, Gus. And yeah, if there's one lesson that I took from this, it's be open-minded. I think the fact that you were a Western trained doctor and that you realize that Western medicine is incredible and fantastic, but it's not the be all and end all. And you were open to these other things. I just think that's such a powerful message, because I always consider myself so open-minded. I've always been a big reader, and I'm open-minded. It is impossible to get to your 40s and not start to become closed-minded. You have to fight against being closed-minded all the time. And then just like you said earlier about living in these echo chambers that we don't even mean to, we're just going about our life, and all the algorithms are putting us in echo chambers, and you have to just keep fighting against it. So I think that for me was just, it's incredible. The story about your mother is amazing. I like I said, I can't wait to finish this book and then restart from the beginning. And it's just being open to seeing the holistic healing through diet. I just believe in it intuitively so much. And to hear that story about your mother is just so powerful, because I think Alzheimer's is probably the scariest disease for the living survivors. I saw my dad go through it with my grandma, and it really broke his heart, and it was just so painful. So I think I'm so glad you said that it's just diabetes. I know you simplified it for us, but diabetes of the brain, and it can be affected by a more ketogenic diet and supplements and changes. So thank you so much.
Of course.
This was really amazing.
I thoroughly enjoyed this. This has been amazing. I look forward to part 2. We would love to sit with you guys and do this again. But I'm really looking forward to you guys visiting us here in Houston and us having a proper good time.
We'll have a wonderful time, and we will be talking about our part 2. But Gus, this has been fantastic. You're a very interesting and well-learned individual, and you are so knowledgeable on so many different topics. We just barely scratched the surface. So we will have to do part 2, but I can't thank you enough for your time. And it's always great seeing your handsome mug. Gus is a very good-looking man. But thank you so much. Say hi to your beautiful family, and we will see you soon.
You guys, it's been lovely. Take care.